Welcome to the Lake Chapala Unitarian Universalist Fellowship. We are a partially lay-led fellowship, which means that our minister, Reverend Matt Alspaugh, is part-time, and members of our congregation present some of our services. My name is Sandy Wallin. I will be your lay leader this morning, and Fred Harland, who planned the service, is giving the address. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. We welcome you to this online service. We know you come here for different reasons, to find community, to seek your spiritual and personal truths, to question, to nurture your heart and soul, to be nurtured, to explore new ideas, to find comfort, and perhaps to find the answers to some of your bigger questions. But all are welcome, no matter your circumstances in life, your race, your gender, who you love, and all of us are loved. So we welcome you. Our announcements were on a slideshow before the service. If you didn't see them, no worries. Reverend Matt will post a link to them tomorrow in his sharing. And now, I just want to welcome you with, live from Fellowship Hall, it's our LCUUF Sunday service. The opening lines of Charles Dickens' A Tale of Two Cities tells about a time of chaos, conflicts, and despair, as well as happiness. It tells us about the time of extreme opposites without any in-betweens, which many feel is true today. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. It was the age of wisdom, it was the age of foolishness. It was the epoch of belief, it was the epoch of incredulity. It was the season of light. It was the season of darkness. It was the spring of hope. It was the winter of despair. We had nothing before us. We were all going direct to heaven. We were all going direct the other way. Our chalice lighting words are "In This Time of Uncertainty" by Amy Williams Clark. We gather in this time of uncertainty, full of unknowns. We light this chalice with a flame that draws us together. With this flame, we cut through the dankness of isolation and are warmed by the fires of our interconnection. For this moment, this radical moment, we find a certainty within the knowable bonds of love and community. Please light your chalice. And we sing together. Do we not sing together? We kindle this light in celebration for the life that we share. There was supposed to be a recording. Anyway. Yeah, okay. Right. Each week, we take time to remind ourselves that we belong to a community which cares for each other. We do this by sharing any significant joys or sorrows in our lives. If you have a joy or sorrow to share today, you can type it into the chat now, and we'll read those aloud. First, let us voice our sorrows or concerns, whatever you or the world may be holding that is in need of our healing and caring thoughts. You are welcome to type sorrows and concerns in the chat box.
We have a concern from Sue Kelly. She says her sister-in-law, Lori, has a mild case of COVID and will recover. Nevertheless, she says, it's no fun. Please wear your mask. From Paula Odom, we have a concern that her 93-year-old mother tested positive for COVID in her nursing home in Southern Illinois. She's in isolation with mild symptoms. 12 out of 37 residents have tested positive so far. From Lynn Cleek, she would like a candle lit in sorrow for her friend who died from COVID last week.
Now let us recall the joys. Whatever you may be celebrating, whatever evokes a feeling of joy or peace for yourself or others, you are welcome to type joys in the chat box.
Please light a candle in joy from Ellen, who says she is back in Ajijic after 3 months in California with wildfires, smoke pollution, evacuation of family members, heat wave upon heat wave, and radiation treatment for cancer, all under the shadow of COVID. Welcome back, Ellen. A joy from Lynn Cleek, who says that she and Gary have been married 42 years on Tuesday. Linda would like to share a joy that they are very happy to be back.
And this candle from our care team represents those sorrows that are too raw, too difficult for us to share aloud. So many of us have had losses, partners, children, grandchildren, losses that remain present with us every day. We will light this candle for all those unspoken sorrows. And now for the pledge report. Our pledge thermometer shows that we have received 726,100 pesos as of November 20th, towards our pledge goal of 700,000 pesos. This means we have reached our pledge goal. So congratulations. It is indeed a time to celebrate. And in case you're wondering, if you haven't yet made a pledge, please consider doing so. You can be sure that the extra money will be put to good use. To make a pledge for the 2021-22 fiscal year, please submit your pledge by sending an email to Lorna Dean, lmdean695@gmail.com, stating that your pledge to LCUUF is a specific annual amount in US or Canadian dollars or pesos. Put your full name in the email. If a couple is pledging together, put both names in the email. This is the time in our service when we ask that you remember that we share our gifts here through pledging and donations. We are not meeting in person now, but our connections to each other, our contributions to the community continue. Instructions for payments to the fellowship are on a slide during the announcements every week. And while you are considering your gifts to the fellowship, remember that each month, LCUUF donates 5,000 pesos or more to an organization providing food aid in our lakeside community. When you pay your pledge, please add something for Share the Basket, as you used to place pesos in our physical basket. You can donate in the same way that you pay your pledge, but please donate Share the Basket separately, or indicate what part of your donation is for Share the Basket. Your offerings are greatly appreciated. Fred is suggesting that rapid change, indeed exponential change, is key to understanding our age. That this change is at the root of today's being both the best of times and the worst of times. Here's a story about exponential change. The story goes that the ruler of India was so pleased with one of his palace wise men who had invented the game of chess that he offered this wise man a reward of his own choosing. The wise man, who was also a wise mathematician, told his master that he would like just 1 grain of rice on the first square of the chessboard, double that number of grains of rice on the second square, and so on. Double the number of grains of rice on each of the next 62 squares on the chessboard. This seemed to the ruler to be a modest request, so he called for his servants to bring the rice. How surprised he was to find that the rice quickly covered the chessboard, then filled the palace. Indeed, the amount of rice required was far more than existed in the whole of India. Just how many grains of rice is this? In mathematics, it's 2 to the 63rd power, or 2 times itself 63 times. Enough that the grains of rice on the last square of the chessboard, if placed end to end, would stretch approximately 60 trillion miles, and if placed end to end, would reach farther than from the Earth, across space to the nearest star, and back to Earth again. That is the power of unlimited exponential growth.
As Sandy has already pointed out in her opening words, today's situation, like in Dickens' A Tale of Two Cities, seems to be a time of turmoil, chaos, conflict, and despair, as well as a time of happiness, a time of extreme opposites. This time of turmoil is a time of rapid change, even exponential change. And the story of chess and rice that Sandy read illustrates the power of exponential change, power that can lead to both good and bad, so that it can seem that it's the best of times or the worst of times. And preparing for today's service provided me with the opportunity to reflect on what's happening today and why there are so many in despair. And why are there others with the opposite feeling, that this is instead the best of times? I also want to explore the notion that Reverend Matt talked about in his October sermon on abundant life, that wanting change, wanting more than we have, is a fundamental characteristic of us as humans. It's part of our biological makeup. And so, the turmoil that we are facing today, based on the rapidity of this change, is perhaps because of who we are, leading, of course, to the question, what to do about it.
For most of human history, about 300,000 years, we lived as hunter-gatherers in sustainable, egalitarian communities of a few dozen people. This changed dramatically about 12,000 years ago with climate stability and warm temperatures, leading to agriculture and large-scale state societies. But most of these agriculture societies expanded and then collapsed, often due to overshoot and climate change. Many people are worried that with climate change and resource depletion, our human society could once again be characterized by hunting and gathering. This poem, The Curse of Akkad, talks about the collapse of one of these agricultural societies. The Curse of Akkad. For the first time since cities were built and founded, the great agricultural tracts produced no grain. The inundated tracts produced no fish. The irrigated orchards produced neither syrup nor wine. The gathered clouds did not rain. The masgurum did not grow. At that time, 1 shekel's worth of oil was only 1/2 quart. These sold at such prices in the markets of all the cities. He who slept on the roof died on the roof. He who slept in the house had no burial. People were flailing at themselves from hunger. That's what happened in the 3rd millennium BC in ancient Babylon.
Pete Soderman is worried. A number of you know Pete. He's been active at LCS, leads discussion groups on addiction, takes part in other groups. He gave a presentation at our service one time. And we won't hold it against him, of course, but he's also an avid Yankees fan. But yes, Pete is worried. Not about COVID, not about the post-election US politics. Pete is worried that our civilization will collapse. Specifically, the governments will no longer be able to provide basic needs: water, food, housing, clothing, energy, for a majority of their populations. Pete sent me some things to read about that. Very persuasive. Now, I'm worrying. Worrying about whether we'll face something like Akkad that Donna read about, or return to a hunter-gatherer civilization because of climate change, depletion of resources. Worrying that our current civilization is tantamount to a car careening down a road going faster and faster. Careening because many of the parameters of our societies and of our impact on the planet are increasing at an exponential rate. That's true of population, GDP, water and energy consumption, the use of fertilizers, the production of engines and telephones, tourism, the atmospheric concentration of greenhouse gases, the number of floods, the damage to ecosystems, the destruction of forests, the extinction rate of species, and so on. So what could happen to this careening vehicle? Presumably, it could run out of gas. Or we could lose control and the vehicle would veer off the road, perhaps crash. Right now, it seems as if due to the pandemic and falling oil prices, running out of gas seems a little less likely. So let's look instead at what could cause the vehicle to lose control and veer off the boundary of the road. There are many things that could do that, many boundaries that we should not cross, such as our consumption of fresh water, how we use the land, and chemical pollution. And most particularly, there's climate change and biodiversity. And climate change is not just about the future. We are now experiencing extreme heat waves and other extreme events, such as storms, hurricanes, floods, and droughts. These are likely to result in water shortages, in heightened risk of war. For example, when barriers are built to prevent refugees who have no place to go, and declines in agricultural yields that could produce famine. And then there's biodiversity, which, just like climate, is so critical. We are bound by and intimately linked to this finite Earth. A species can only survive when everything around it thrives. That is, we depend on other living beings for our survival. But we are now experiencing a rate of disappearance of other living species at apparently 1,000 times the geological average. That is, the non-human world is practically gone. We've destroyed it during a single lifetime. To save ourselves, it's imperative that we learn how to work with nature, not against it. Crossing these boundaries is as if we've smoked a pack and a half of cigarettes daily for 30 years and are now suffering the consequences, which means that decades of growing crises are likely already locked into the global ecosystem and cannot easily be reversed. And that's why there's talk among geologists and other scientists of a new geological period. They call it the Anthropocene, a period when humans have become such a force that they've upset the major cycles of the Earth system. So yes, it seems that these are indeed the worst of times.
Hello. Another point of view. Steven Pinker, he's a Harvard psychologist, one of the leading proponents of the notion that indeed are the best of times. Here are some excerpts from his TED Talk of 2018, a couple years ago. Many people face the news each morning with trepidation and dread every day. We read of shootings, inequality, pollution, dictatorship, war, and the spread of nuclear weapons. These are some of the reasons that each year is called the worst year ever until the next year claimed that record and left many people longing for earlier decades when the world seemed safer, cleaner, more equal. But is this a sensible way to understand the human condition in the 21st century? As Franklin Pierce Adams pointed out, nothing is more responsible for the good old days than a bad memory. Pinker continues, you can always fool yourself into seeing a decline if you compare bleeding headlines of the present with rose-tinted images of the past. What does the trajectory of the world look like when we measure well-being over time using a constant yardstick? For all their differences, people largely agree on what goes into human well-being: life, health, sustenance, prosperity, peace, freedom, safety, knowledge, leisure, happiness. All of these things can be measured. They have improved over time. That, I submit, is progress. And that is exactly what has happened. Life expectancy has increased from 30 to 80. Famine has been banished to the most remote and war-ravaged regions. Extreme poverty has gone from 90% of the world's population to fewer than 10%. Where powerful states and empires were once pretty much always at war with each other, now they're never at war with each other. Today, a Western European has 1/35 of the chance of being murdered compared to his medieval ancestors. Progress is not a matter of faith or optimism, but it is a fact of human history. Indeed, the greatest fact in human history.
You've just heard Steven Pinker argue, as read by Joni, that progress is a reality, that these are indeed the best of times. And many others have said similar things. Many of us will remember Reverend Gary Kowalski, a UU minister who came here a number of times. I looked Reverend Gary up on the internet. Here's the beginning of one of his sermons. Imagine that you had power, unprecedented, life-altering power, to shape the course of human evolution. Imagine that you could forever rid the world of disability and disease. Suppose you could extend the human lifespan by 50 or 100 years. What if you could boost the mental power of the human mind by an order of magnitude? Or give men and women bodies that in strength and agility could outstrip the greatest athletes of our time. And as long as we're dreaming, imagine stumbling across the fountain of youth, the secret of eternal vitality. All of this may sound like far-fetched science fiction, but if we can believe the promises of the bioengineers and nanotechnologists, all of it could soon be science fact. In listening to Reverend Gary, two things seem clear. One is that things are changing very quickly, indeed exponentially so. The other, read the Indian fable about chess and rice, is the enormous power of such rapid exponential change. And Moore's law describes that power. Moore's law, a rule of thumb concerning the computer industry, tells us that computing power per unit costs has been growing exponentially, doubling every year or so. And that's been true since at least 1965. Moore's law has thus been describing a critical driving force of technological and social change. Because much of the technological change we're witnessing today is connected, even based on electronics and computers, and help explain some of the amazing, mind-boggling things we're witnessing. And many people today, especially those calling themselves transhumanists, have a vision that there is nothing that cannot, at least in principle, be changed. No true limits. Through the rapid advancements in science and technology, we can all be made better, enhanced beyond our wildest imagining. They say that Man is the greatest wonder because he can choose to transform himself. And also that we must become angels. That is, there is no fixed humanity. You can choose what you want to be. And this interest in enhancement, they suggest, has always been essential to the very definition of being human. We're like gods, and might as well get used to it. Might as well get good at it. And soon, inevitably, in, say, 100 years, we will be very different than we are now. Perhaps a completely new species. Call us Homo evolutus, man in charge of his own evolution. And to those who fear that our focus on changing things will be bad for others, for the environment, they have an answer. We can make everything better, including the environment. How? Through the continued march of science. We've already seen that march in the 20th century. A doubling of lifespan, DNA, lifestyle changes with the TV, car, airplane, microelectronics, the internet. And the 21st century promises to be even more amazing, with many more innovations. And there's no reason, they say, that science can't handle climate change. Because of science, fossil fuels will no longer be needed, and we won't run out of energy. Nuclear fusion can provide all the energy we could possibly want. And as well, solar and wind are getting cheaper all the time, and energy storage is getting so much better. We don't need to pollute. We can manufacture things, plastics, clothing, and other products without producing waste. We're not stuck with the problems that we've so far created. We can remove greenhouse gases from the atmosphere. We can sequestrate carbon. We can profit from our waste, turning both plastics and other garbage into dollars. And most importantly, we're learning how to live in balance with nature and to restore biodiversity through reforestation, plant restoration, regenerative agriculture, through preventing species extinction, and even perhaps bringing extinct species back to life. Yes, we're working to restore the ecology. So yes, there is amazing progress. And yes, it seems that these are indeed the best of times.
We'll build a land when we bind up the broken. We'll build a land where the captives go free.
Reverend Matt's sermon, Abundant Life, refers to a number of writings about desire. One was from Timothy Miller, the author of How to Want What You Have. Miller's thesis is that our desire for what we don't have is part of our instinct. It's part of our biological makeup to want more than we have. This made good sense when we lived in primitive conditions with constant shortages, when our lives were in constant danger. Hence, the desire to have more became inbred. It became part of our undeveloped personality. A second writing Matt discussed was from the book of James in the Christian Bible. Those conflicts and disputes among you, where do they come from? Do they not come from your cravings that are at war within you? And a third writing from the philosopher Albert Camus, is there a sin against life? If there is a sin against life, it consists perhaps not so much in despairing of life as in hoping for another life and in eluding the implacable grandeur of this life. So, said Matt, to have a sense of abundance, you have to learn how to want what you have and not more than you have.
Each week, Richard Clark from our fellowship peruses a lot of science journals and chooses items to show on hot science, breaking news in science, technology, and medicine. Each week, he has stories on how fossil fuel companies are trying to burn more fossil fuels or trying to turn them into plastics to flood the third world. But each week, he also has stories on how science is counteracting this by, for example, exchanging trash for cash, transforming greenhouse gases and garbage into useful things, and making money doing it. Causing Richard to wonder, is it inevitable that climate change will defeat us? Or is it possible that we can defeat climate change? Pete Soderman, on the other hand, doesn't wonder. He remains worried. And he also senses, as Albert Einstein has said, we cannot solve our problems with the same thinking we used to create them. I'm not going to speculate. I'm not going to speculate on what happens when the best of times collides with the worst. That is, when Moore's Law and the ongoing march of science confront the Anthropocene. As Socrates apparently said, to be uncertain is to be uncomfortable, but to be certain is to be ridiculous. But the best of times is already colliding with the worst. Our man-made pandemic has slowed down the education of girls, has also slowed down our global progress towards achieving Agenda 30, the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals for 2030. And rising seawaters are already forcing Pacific Islanders to abandon their homes, where they've lived for thousands of years. And we know that the ongoing march of science and technology is precisely what caused the Anthropocene. But what drives that ongoing march? I think the secret might be what Gary read in Reverend Matt's Abundant Life sermon. It's the desire for what we don't have, a desire that is part of our instinct as human beings. That desire drove us tens of thousands of years ago to move out of Africa onto land where the Neanderthals lived, onto land where we hunted big game animals, and from where we went on to explore Asia, the Pacific, and the Americas. And later, that desire spawned the industrial age based on fossil fuels. And more importantly, most recently, It also spawned the information and biological ages based on computers, sorry, Moore's Law, and DNA, which makes it seem perhaps that there are no limits to what we can achieve. But almost from the beginning, our desire to have more, to make ourselves better, often made things worse for others, for the environment. After some time, the Neanderthals, who had been in Europe before us, became extinct, as did large game animals in much of Asia and the Americas. But almost from the beginning, our desire to have more, to make ourselves better, often made things worse for others, for the environment. After some time, the Neanderthals, who had been in Europe before us, became extinct, as did large game animals in much of Asia and the Americas. And later, we, as Europeans, decimated the native Indians of the Americas and created enormous hardships for those we left living. And then we humans crammed into every corner of the planet, developing a vast wildlife trade, with wet markets in South Asia and bush meat markets in Africa, where infections are easily transmitted from one animal to another, making it likely, with global air travel, for epidemics to convert to pandemics, which we've witnessed with COVID-19. So now, as we said before, we humans, based on our desire to change things, to have more, have spawned a new geological era, and it's appropriately named after us, the Anthropocene. A new geological era recognizing that we've upset the major geochemical cycles of the Earth system. So that's what we've done. And we don't know whether advancing science is up to the task of dealing with it. So, what should we do? In wondering about this, I remember Fred Kessling's words in his World Out of Control presentation back in September. I hope you can walk away from the viral screaming matches around us. I hope you can continue to deal with what the universe is throwing at you. I hope you can move away from the absolutes weighing you down and embrace the absurdity of these times. I hope you continue to love humanity through this darkness. I hope you can withstand the deconstruction of childhood fantasies and delusions. I hope you continue walking your own path to authenticity. And I hope you persist. And you may also recall that Fred closed his presentation with the Serenity Prayer. God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and wisdom to know the difference. This prayer suggests that there are two things to focus on. One, doing what we can do. And two, accepting what we can't. On the first, if you're concerned about collapse or climate change, as Pete Soderman is, if you feel these things are indeed the worst of times, you can join up with others who are doing their best to deal with these things. It's so much more rewarding working with others and is likely more effective as well. And another option is supporting people right here. And lots of organizations are doing just that. Working to make our communities more resilient, better able to meet the challenges that lie ahead, and also enabling us to experience the joy that comes from helping others. The second focus is accepting what we can't change. And perhaps in accepting, we can let go of the worries of the world and for a while, glory instead in its wonders. Recognizing that we, and in particular those of us lucky to be living at Lakeside, have enough, more than we need. There is more than enough nature to go around, more than enough sunshine, more than enough food that we can shop for safely or have safely brought to us. And even during this pandemic, through the wonders of technology, we can be in touch with our relatives and our friends, and can experience all of the best entertainment of the world with museums and plays here at our doorstep, or at least on our computer devices. So yes, on this second focus of accepting what we cannot change, we can indeed realize that we have enough, and that we can experience enjoyment in the moment. So yes, we are thus mindful of and grateful for the insight from Albert Camus. If there is a sin against life, it consists perhaps in hoping for another life, and in eluding the implacable grandeur of this life. Yes, there is turmoil and uncertainty, but nevertheless, this life here is grand. Let's revel in it. So be it.
Let us extinguish our chalices with these words which we read together. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we keep in our hearts and share with all the world. Our closing words today come from Cheryl Block. As we go forward into this frightening, exhilarating, confusing, miraculous world, may we offer our comfort to the afflicted, our love to those who are lonely, and our wish for all to be safe.